Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump.
If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you remember Tom Hanks as the man who could do no wrong. From splashing onto the scene in comedies to winning back-to-back Oscars, his face was everywhere. He was America's everyman, the actor who felt like family. That's why fans were stunned when his presence began to fade. His roles less talked about, his life quieter than anyone expected. Today, we uncover how the man once hailed as Hollywood's most beloved star lives now, and the truth may shock you. Tom Hanks was born in Concord, California in 1956. His childhood was marked by constant movement. His parents divorced when he was just 5, and young Tom bounced between homes. That instability shaped him. He once admitted, "I was always the new kid. I got used to making friends fast or being lonely." That sense of searching would later resonate in the characters he brought to life. In the late 1970s, he studied theater at Sacramento State and sharpened his craft in small productions. It wasn't glamorous, cheap apartments, endless rehearsals, and a stubborn belief that something bigger was possible. He eventually landed a spot with the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival in Ohio. It was there, playing Shakespeare under the summer sun, that he built the foundation for his career. Fans at the time wouldn't have known his name, but those who saw him on stage described a presence you couldn't ignore. Then came television. In 1980, audiences caught their first glimpse of Tom Hanks in Bosom Buddies, a quirky sitcom where he dressed in drag to land an apartment. It was silly, even absurd, but his charm leapt off the screen. Viewers saw not just comedy, but warmth, something authentic in every line. The show didn't last long, but it gave him visibility. And more importantly, Hollywood took notice. By the mid-80s, he had broken through the noise. Movies like Splash, 1984, and Bachelor Party, 1984, showed his comedic timing. But it was Big, 1988, that transformed him into a household name. The film about a boy who magically wakes up in a grown man's body didn't just succeed, it became a cultural phenomenon. Kids quoted it on playgrounds. Adults remembered the giant piano dance scene in FAO Schwartz like it was etched into their own childhood. Suddenly, Tom Hanks wasn't just an actor. He was a shared experience, and that's what separated him. Fans didn't just watch his movies, they lived with them. His characters felt like friends, like uncles, like neighbors. By the late 80s, Tom Hanks wasn't climbing anymore. He was sprinting toward the peak of Hollywood, and audiences everywhere were along for the ride. The 1990s were Tom Hanks' decade. Hollywood has crowned many kings, but rarely with the consistency he delivered. After Big cemented his name, the early 90s proved he wasn't a one-hit wonder, he was a force of nature. In 1993, Philadelphia changed everything. Playing Andrew Beckett, a lawyer fired for having AIDS, Hanks gave a performance that shook audiences. It wasn't just acting, it was raw, human heartbreaking. The film put the AIDS crisis in America at the center of mainstream conversation, and Hanks walked away with his first Academy Award. For many fans, it was the moment they realized he wasn't just a lovable comedy actor. He was an artist capable of moving the world. Then came Forrest Gump in 1994. "Life is like a box of chocolates" wasn't just a line, it became a cultural mantra. The movie dominated theaters, won 6 Oscars, and transformed Tom Hanks into a global icon. People laughed, cried, and quoted the film endlessly. Gump t-shirts, Gump impersonators, Gump references in politics, sports, and classrooms. It was everywhere. Watching Hanks as Forrest wasn't like watching a performance. It was like being invited into a story that felt universal. And just when it seemed he couldn't climb higher, he kept rising. In 1990, Apollo 13 captured America's love of heroism and space exploration, and Hanks's line, "Houston, we have a problem," became instantly legendary. A year later, he became Woody in Toy Story, lending his voice to a character that would become a generational treasure. Children grew up hearing Tom Hanks's voice as the sheriff who never gave up on his friends. Decades later, adults still tear up when Woody says goodbye. The hits kept coming. Saving Private Ryan, 1998, was brutal, epic, unforgettable. Steven Spielberg's war masterpiece didn't just showcase Hanks's gravitas, it underscored his ability to carry the weight of America's most painful history on his shoulders. Fans walked out of theaters stunned, many saying it was the most realistic war film they had ever seen. For veterans, it felt like validation of sacrifice. For younger audiences, it was a wake-up call. By the time the 90s closed, Tom Hanks had 2 Oscars, multiple box office juggernauts, and a reputation untouched by scandal. He was trusted, adored, practically mythic. In a decade where stars often burned bright and fast, Hanks seemed eternal. The man who once scrambled to make friends as a kid had become Hollywood's most reliable companion and everyman who was, paradoxically, larger than life. The strange thing about Tom Hanks' decline is that it didn't arrive with a scandal. There were no explosive tabloid covers, no humiliating court cases, no shocking arrests. In fact, that's exactly what made it so unsettling. Hollywood is used to stars crashing and burning in spectacular fashion. But Hanks didn't crash, he drifted. And for fans who had grown up watching him at the center of everything, that slow fade was, in its own way, even harder to accept. The 2000s began with triumph. Castaway wasn't just a box office success, it was a cultural event. People debated how long they could survive on a deserted island. They joked about naming their own Wilson. They marveled at his transformation, both physical and emotional. Hanks was nominated for yet another Oscar, proving he still had it. But what followed was a string of choices that, while bold, didn't land with the same force. Road to Perdition 2002 showed him as a hitman, a darker role than audiences expected. Critics praised the cinematography and the somber tone, but many viewers admitted they couldn't quite reconcile their beloved everyman with a cold-blooded killer. The film did solid business, but it didn't become the cultural phenomenon that fans had come to expect from Hanks. Then came The Lady Killers in 2004. A Coen brothers comedy should have been a surefire win. Instead, it was widely panned, with many critics calling it one of the weaker entries in the Coens' career. For Hanks, it was more than a misfire, it was a reminder that not even he was bulletproof. The same year, he reunited with Steven Spielberg for The Terminal. The premise was fascinating. A man stuck in an airport, unable to enter America or return home. Hanks gave a committed, heartfelt performance, adopting a thick Eastern European accent and embodying vulnerability with his trademark sincerity. Yet audiences were divided. Some found it charming, others dismissed it as cloying. For the first time in years, a Tom Hanks film didn't feel like an automatic cultural touchstone. But it was the Da Vinci Code in 2006 that perhaps signaled the clearest change. Adapted from Dan Brown's runaway bestseller, the film was almost guaranteed to make money, and it did, raking in hundreds of millions. But the critical reception was brutal. Many thought the pacing was sluggish, the story preposterous, and Hanks sporting an oddly unconvincing hairstyle seemed strangely muted. Sequels followed, Angels and Demons in 2009, Inferno in 2016, but the magic never materialized. They made money, yes, but they didn't inspire passion. They felt like products, not cultural events. Meanwhile, the landscape of Hollywood was shifting. A new generation of stars, Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Johnny Depp, at the peak of Pirates fame, were drawing the headlines and commanding the spotlight. Hanks, still respected, seemed almost safe, too safe. In an era where anti-heroes and edgy performances were the rage, his wholesome everyman act suddenly felt like a relic from another time. Even his box office draw was questioned. Charlie Wilson's War, 2007, teamed him with Julia Roberts, another 90s titan, in a politically charged drama directed by Mike Nichols. It should have been huge. Instead, it underperformed, leaving critics to note that star power wasn't what it once was. The man who had once been Hollywood's surest bet was now being measured against his past glories, and the numbers weren't keeping up. Fans felt it too. They still loved him, still trusted him, but the excitement wasn't the same. Going to see a Tom Hanks movie no longer felt like an event. And when you've been America's leading man for over a decade, that subtle downgrade feels seismic. For many, it was like watching a beloved athlete play past his prime, not embarrassing, but undeniably slower, less dominant, less essential. And so, whispers began. Was Tom Hanks slipping into irrelevance? Could he adapt to a Hollywood that now prized darker themes, flashier franchises, and stars half his age? For longtime admirers, it was a painful question. They had grown up with him as a constant, a symbol of reliability in an industry built on volatility. To imagine him fading even quietly was like watching a piece of their own past disappear. This was not a tabloid fall from grace. It was something quieter, more haunting. A legend not undone by scandal, but by time itself. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, Tom Hanks was still working steadily, but something had changed in the way audiences engaged with him. He wasn't gone. Not really. His name was still on posters, his face still on talk shows, but the electricity was different. For a man who once defined the cultural pulse, this quieter reception felt like disappearance in slow motion. Hollywood, always ruthless with its darlings, had shifted gears. Franchises were king now. Superheroes, billion-dollar universes, endless sequels. Tom Hanks, the actor who had once embodied the relatable everyman, didn't fit the mold. He wasn't a cape-wearing Avenger or a dystopian anti-hero. He wasn't going to headline Twilight, The Hunger Games, or Harry Potter. And in the churn of blockbuster dominance, his grounded human-scale dramas began to feel small. Fans noticed. By the time Larry Crowne, 2011, hit theaters, a romantic comedy Hanks directed and starred in opposite Julia Roberts, many were startled at how dated it felt. The film stumbled badly, both critically and commercially. For audiences who remembered Forrest Gump or Saving Private Ryan, this was a hard pill to swallow. How had the man once considered untouchable become a symbol of safe, forgettable Hollywood fluff? The media response was blunt. Headlines asked if Hanks' era was over. Critics openly debated whether he had lost the ability to connect with modern audiences. And on social media, where younger viewers now define in the conversation, Hanks was barely mentioned at all. For millennials and Gen Z, he wasn't the star of the moment, was their parents' star, a figure from a past Hollywood they hadn't lived through. Even when he returned to the kinds of roles he excelled in, the spotlight didn't shine the same way. Captain Phillips 2013 drew critical acclaim, particularly for the raw emotion of his final scene where he collapses into shock after being rescued. But while critics hailed it as some of his best work, the cultural conversation was brief. It didn't stick the way Forrest Gump or Philadelphia had. Fans admired it, but they didn't relive it, didn't quote it endlessly, didn't treat it like a generational milestone. The same happened with Bridge of Spies 2015, his Cold War drama with Spielberg. Solid reviews, awards chatter, but no lasting buzz. It was as if audiences had filed Tom Hanks under respected veteran rather than must-watch event. And perhaps the clearest evidence of his shifting status came with Sully 2016. Playing Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, the pilot who miraculously landed a plane on the Hudson River, Hanks delivered another steady, believable performance. Yet the movie's conversation faded almost as quickly as it arrived. What once would have dominated headlines and awards chatter for months now felt like another modest chapter in a long career. The silence was most telling between films. In the 90s, a gap between Hanks' projects felt like waiting for the next big thing. By the 2010s, it felt like he had quietly slipped into the background of Hollywood. Fans still respected him, but they no longer needed him in the same way. His cultural presence, once woven into daily life, into jokes, into political speeches, into commercials, was fading. And fans asked the inevitable question, where did he go? How could the man who once defined Hollywood's heartbeat become so quiet, so peripheral, so easy to overlook? For a generation, it was like watching a lighthouse dim. The beacon was still there, still glowing faintly on the horizon. But the world around it had changed, and its guiding light. Today, Tom Hanks lives in a strange duality. On one hand, he is still America's dad, one of the most beloved actors alive. On the other, his cultural dominance has unquestionably faded. He no longer headlines the box office juggernauts that define a decade. His name doesn't stop traffic the way it once did. For fans who grew up with him as a permanent fixture of their lives, the reality is almost surreal. The man who once filled theaters now lives largely outside the Hollywood spotlight. At 69 years old, Hanks chooses his projects carefully. He no longer works at the frantic pace of the 1990s, when a new classic seemed to arrive every year. Instead, his recent films feel smaller, quieter, sometimes almost invisible in the crowded marketplace of superheroes and billion-dollar franchises. In the late 2010s, he received critical praise for his portrayal of Fred Rogers in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, 2019. It was a role that felt tailor-made for him, warm, gentle, wise, and profoundly human. Critics applauded, fans smiled at the casting, and yet, despite strong reviews, the film came and went without leaving the deep cultural imprint that his earlier works had carved so effortlessly. Streaming platforms have also shifted the perception of his career. Greyhound 2020, a World War II naval drama that Hanks both wrote and starred in, bypassed theaters entirely due to the pandemic, premiering on Apple TV+. While it was praised by many, the lack of a theatrical release meant it never had a chance to dominate pop culture conversation. For fans used to seeing his name on massive cinema marquees, watching him quietly appear on a streaming service felt like a come-down. Then there's his appearance in Elvis 2022, where he played Colonel Tom Parker, the controversial manager of Elvis Presley. For the first time in years, a Tom Hanks performance was widely debated and not in the way he might have hoped. Critics and audiences alike questioned his accent, his makeup, even his casting. Some said it was the weakest performance of his career. For a man once universally praised, the backlash was jarring. Beyond the screen, his personal life has also placed him back in the headlines. Hanks has been married to actress Rita Wilson since 1988, one of Hollywood's most enduring marriages. But even their relationship hasn't escaped scrutiny. When the couple became some of the first celebrities to test positive for COVID-19 in early 2020, the news shook the world. For a brief moment, it was as if the virus itself had been given a human face, the face of America's most trusted star. Fans flooded social media with prayers and messages, proof that his place in the collective heart hadn't disappeared. And yet, in the years since, his public presence has felt increasingly subdued. He occasionally goes viral for quirky moments, scolding fans for being too aggressive with Rita or laughing at internet memes, but these flashes only highlight the contrast. He's no longer the dominant star at the center of pop culture. He's a beloved elder statesman, respected, admired, but quietly drifting further from the spotlight. Even his physical appearance has become a subject of discussion. Fans who remember the boyish energy of Big or the lean hero of Saving Private Ryan now see an older man, his hair thinner, his frame less commanding. Time, which once seemed to leave him untouched, has caught up. For those who idolized him in their youth, it's a sobering reminder not only of his mortality, but of their own. And there's an irony here. Tom Hanks hasn't vanished. He's still working, still visible, still recognizable around the world. But compared to the towering shadow he cast over Hollywood in the 1990s, the present feels muted. His projects don't dominate cultural conversation. His films don't define eras. His presence doesn't feel essential in the way it once did. For fans, this is the hardest truth to swallow. The man who once seemed eternal, who embodied the very idea of stardom without scandal or cynicism, now feels like a guest in a Hollywood that has moved on. It's not a disgrace, not a failure, but a reminder that even the brightest stars eventually dim. Today, Tom Hanks lives with grace, dignity, and quiet purpose. But the shocking reality remains. The man who once ruled the box office, who shaped the very texture of American cinema, is no longer at the center of it all. And for audiences who still remember the magic of Forrest Gump's first run across the country, that absence feels like a missing piece of their own history. Tom Hanks' story isn't one of scandal or disgrace. It's not about a star destroyed by excess or undone by betrayal. His story is more subtle, more human, a reminder that even the brightest lights eventually fade not because they failed, but because time itself insists on change. For millions of fans, Hanks wasn't just an actor. He was a presence, a companion in the theater seat next to them, the voice of Woody echoing through childhood bedrooms, the man who made them laugh in Big, cry in Philadelphia, and believe in miracles in Forrest Gump. His films weren't just entertainment, they were part of the fabric of life. And that's why his quieter presence today feels so strange. It forces us to reckon with the passage of time, with the way heroes evolve, with the reality that nothing, no matter how golden, lasts forever. Tom Hanks still works, still loves, still inspires, but the days when he was the pulse of Hollywood are gone. For fans, it's a bittersweet truth, like closing a book you never wanted to end, but the memories remain. Do you remember the first time you heard "Run, Forrest, Run"? Or the tears that came when Wilson drifted away on the open sea? For many, those moments weren't just cinematic, they were personal. They were stitched into the soundtrack of their lives. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. Not endless fame, not eternal relevance, but the ability to live on in the memories of those who watched, who felt, who grew up alongside him. Tom Hanks may no longer be the unstoppable force of Hollywood, but for countless fans, he will always be the man who made them feel something unforgettable. Tell us, what's the Tom Hanks moment you'll never forget? Share it in the comments, and let us know who you'd like us to explore next. Because every star has a story, and every story tells us something about ourselves.